Hello, and welcome to the Bible Study Rewind, where we go over the last study that we had at the Santee Church of Christ on Sunday morning. We do have another class on Wednesday night as well, but this one is for the Sunday morning review for anybody who might have missed the class and wanted to find out what we talked about. So, we are going to go over Deuteronomy chapter 7. If you want to know what went on in any of the other classes, you can find any one of those at either our YouTube location or our Facebook site as well. So you can go there even if you want an introduction into the book or a general overview, that can be found there as well. So we're in Deuteronomy chapter 7, and we're just going to get right into it, and this is going to be brief, just as a refresher as to what happened in class. So chapter 6, of course, God opens a discussion with his people through Moses about loving him, and he gives them a warning. And chapter 7 continues that thought. It's about love, which should be driving them to faith. And it's about warning them as well that they shouldn't be forgetting anything about what God is doing for them and why he's doing it for them. So I'm going to go through my answers to the questions, and then I'll do a brief review of what was said in class. And we didn't cover everything, but we did pretty well. So, in the beginning, there were quite a few comments as far as what people thought was in this chapter, because it's a fairly brutal chapter when you look at it. It was a brutal time for the Israelites who were going in to take over land that God had promised to them, and I'll go over that at the end of the class. So, the very first question is what does God call his people to do? And that will be found in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. And this is what it says. You shall not be afraid of them. Okay, God's telling them to go in and destroy these peoples. Remembering, you shall remember that which Jehovah your God has done to Pharaoh and to all Egypt, the great trials which your eyes have seen, and the miracles and the wonders and the mighty hand and the stretched out arm with which Jehovah your God has brought you out. So Jehovah your God shall do to all the peoples whose face you are afraid. And Jehovah your God shall send the hornets among them until the ones who are left perish, even those who hide themselves from your face. You shall not tremble before them, for Jehovah your God is among you, a mighty and fearful God. And Jehovah your God will clear out those nations before you by little and little. You may not consume them all at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon you. And Jehovah your God shall deliver them up before you and destroy them with a great destruction, until they are exterminated. And he shall give their kings into your hand, and you shall destroy their name. From under the heavens no man shall be able to stand before you until you have destroyed them. So you probably noticed there, Moses says Jehovah your God a lot of times, and that's really an indication. He's drawing a straight line between Jehovah and the Israelites. He says you 40-something times, or however many times it was. I counted it. I don't remember what it was. It was a crazy amount of times. And he uses that word, the name Jehovah, and he's trying to get into their mind that they are connected. So, but what were they supposed to do? Well, they are to utterly destroy the people that God told them to. There were 7 nations. God said, you need to go in and just take them out completely. And, we had a pretty good discussion as to how the world views us from a human point of view. And there were a lot of misunderstandings about God and what he can and can't do and still be righteous, because God is God. He is never unrighteous because of by the nature of who he is. They were not to cut a covenant with them, and they were not to show mercy to these people. And this just seems like, wow, why is God saying these things? In the cases where a specific tribe of people were committing heinous acts in their worship, God required complete obliteration of those peoples. Child sacrifice was not unusual in this day, and sexual immorality was rampant in most, if not all, of these religions. And this is something that people don't understand about what was going on in the land. And, the big question always comes up is God a tyrant? Well, of course he's not a tyrant. And we'll get into what some people said about that at the end of this. There are a lot of different types of idolatry going on, and a lot of people were sacrificing their children to these idols. They were burning them alive and doing all these things. I'm assuming they were burning them alive. They told that it was stated that they had to pass through the fire. And a lot of people attribute that to something else, but they were basically murdered for these idols. And then, of course, there were also lots of other sexual immoralities in these temples. And God just had enough of it. And he's sending the people in to destroy them. So verse 6 says this: "For you are a holy people to Jehovah your God. Jehovah your God has chosen you to be his own treasure out of all the people on the face of the earth." And the question is, why were the people to do these things when they entered into the land? Well, they're a holy people, okay? That's why. And, it's interesting, and we'll find out how they got holy, right? It isn't out of their own strength. And this is a treasure for God. And as I said earlier, this is that straight line between God and his people. They were to show this great association between him and them. And the root word means sacred, ceremonially, or morally, like a saint, or like a sanctuary. They're kind of separated out from the rest of everybody else. This is that association that everyone was supposed to see between them and Jehovah God. Okay, verses 7 and 8 say this: "Jehovah did not set his love on you or choose you because you were more in number than any people, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But because Jehovah loves you, and because he kept the oath which he swore to your fathers, Jehovah has caused you to go out with a strong hand and redeemed you from the house of slaves, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt." And what does God say is not the reason he chose Israel? And why did he choose Israel? Well, he did not set his love, and here's God talking about love again, on you, he says, or choose you because you were more than any people. He chose you and loves you because he wanted to keep the oath which he swore to your fathers, and because they were the least of the peoples. So we see God doing this throughout most of the scriptures. He chooses people who are not necessarily like of noble descent, or necessarily had some kind of great stature. I mean, occasionally you'd see somebody like Samson come along, who's this great strong guy, or sometimes a guy was tall and handsome, but usually they were of humble origin. And this is throughout the scriptures that God does this, and he does it to show who he is. Because if somebody does it of their own strength, they may go astray in that. Okay, 9 through 10, how does God describe himself? And then 11 through 16, what does this mean for the people? 9 and 10. Because of this, you know that Jehovah your God, he is God, the faithful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to those who love him and to those who keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, and repaying to his face those that hate him, to destroy him. He will not delay. He will not repay him who hate him. He will repay him who hate him to his face. So there's a couple of verses to think about first. And then he says, and you shall keep the commandments and the statutes and the ordinances which I am commanding you today to do them. And it shall be because you hear judgments and keep and do them, even Jehovah your God will keep with you the covenant and the mercy which he swore to your fathers. And he says that quite a bit. And he will love you and bless you and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your body and the fruit of your land and your grain and your wine and your oil, the increase of your oxen and the wealth of your flock, and the land which he has sworn to your fathers. And there's that reference again. To give it to you. You shall be blessed above all people. There shall not be a barren man or a barren woman among you, which was the ultimate thing a person could do, is bear children. Nor among your livestock. Even their livestock were going to bear more livestock. And Jehovah shall turn aside every sickness from you, and he will not put on you any of the evil diseases of Egypt, which you have known, but he will put them on all who hate you. And you shall destroy all the peoples whom Jehovah your God is giving to you, and your eye shall have no pity on them. And you shall not serve their gods, for it shall be a snare to you. So, as I said earlier, we're talking about some very evil practices that were going on during the day. And God is setting up his army to go in and destroy those practices and the peoples behind it. Every person. And some people had some comments about that, and we'll talk about that. So, how does God describe himself? Well, God is certain to keep his covenant. He is faithful. He will have mercy on those who love him. And just as certainly God will respond and repay those who hate him and his people. Anybody who's his enemies. And those are the people in the land who are worshiping these other gods. And this is what he's warning his people about. So what does this mean for the people? Well, Moses is tempering obedience with matters of the heart. It is not enough to not consider yourself an enemy of God. I'm not an enemy of God. He requires his children to come to love him as well. That's a lot more than just being obedient out of compulsion. What did that require on their part? Dedication and commitment. The outward evidence was listening, remembering, and hearkening to his word and obeying. Yet even a stubborn child will obey out of fear. God required them to draw near to him and remember his affection for them. He wanted them to put all of their trust in him. He just told Israel that they were holy. Were they? That's the big question, right? If they're going to be holy, this is what he's telling them, this is what I'm looking for. If they were, it was because of God, not of their own doing. And God is making that clear to them. How should we consider, for the Christian, should we consider someone who loves us that much, like God loved these people? He saves us from our own stupidity, the dumb things that we can do, and looks only to build us up. Once Israel can achieve that level of faith, God would do virtually anything for their benefit. Anything good, of course, and righteous. And my main point there is nothing has changed over time. That's why it's so important to see that God has never changed. He was the same back then as he is today. We just happen to have the benefit of the Messiah, which brings everything into clear focus for us. And of course, we have his word, which is, it's just a great treasure and totally priceless to have in our lives. Okay. So these are a couple of questions we didn't get to. I'll go ahead and get to them just really quick. What does God give the people to overcome their fear when they go in to conquer the land? That's 17 through 24. And how would these things help the people? How do these things help us have faith and not fear? That's 17 through 24. If you shall say in your heart, these nations are more plentiful than I, how can I throw them out? You shall not be afraid of them, remembering you shall remember that which Jehovah your God has done to Pharaoh and to all Egypt. There's this physical manifestation of God. The great trials which your eyes have seen, and the miracles and the wonders, and the mighty hand and the stretched out arm which Jehovah your God has brought you out. So Jehovah your God shall do to all the peoples whose face you are afraid. And Jehovah your God shall send the hornets among them, until the ones who are left perish, even those who hide themselves from your face. You shall not tremble before them, for Jehovah your God is among you, a mighty and fearful God. And Jehovah your God will clear out those nations before you, little by little. You may not consume them at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon you. And Jehovah your God shall deliver them up before you and destroy them with a great destruction until they are exterminated. So God's saying, you will be my hand in this, but it's really me doing it. And he shall give their kings into your hand, and you shall destroy their name under the heavens. No man shall be able to stand before you until you have destroyed them. This is really heavy stuff. And, unless we were living in that day, there's not a lot we can say about it, though a lot of people want to accuse God of a lot of things based on these verses, and they just simply have little and no ground to stand on whatsoever. So, faith. What does God give the people to overcome their fear? Faith, right? I'm going to be the one doing this for you. You need to rely on me, is what he's saying to them. And he's already established a lot of their faith when they destroyed the King Og and King Sihon, the two king of the giants. These were giant people, and they've already destroyed them. So they are already somewhat established in this faith with God. They've already proved some of that. Proof of God's physical protection. Pharaoh being tested. Signs, miracles, God's strength. He will send hornets ahead of these people. God will be the one defeating these nations. He is the one with great strength. Nothing has changed. And I'm going to say this probably throughout this whole study. Nothing has changed. It's the same thing for the Christian. God is the one going before us. And he is our strength. We're not. Who are we? We don't even know the depths of God. Our strength still dwells in God and his word. We have these historical things as testimony to bolster our faith. I just thought it was interesting as well that they were to destroy their name. In other words, even the memory of who these people were was to be removed from the face of the earth. It seems terrible to us, but we are not God and we are not them. And they were in a very extraordinary position at this moment where God, in the previous book, had trained them up to be a great army to take possession of the land that he had promised to Abraham. Okay, what is God's message in 25 and 26? You shall burn the carved images of their gods with fire. You shall not lust after the silver and the gold in them, nor shall you take it to yourself, that you not be snared by it. For it is an abomination to Jehovah. Talking about anything that has to do with idolatry. Just get rid of it. You shall not bring an abomination into your house, that you not be a cursed thing like it. And you see in when Joshua goes in that they find that out the hard way. You shall utterly detest it, and you shall utterly hate it, for it is a cursed thing. And so there you go. That's God's telling them, look, when you go in, just wipe that stuff out. Don't even have a resemblance of anything that has to do with idolatry. Idols of a conquered nation were to be destroyed completely. Anything of value found in a sanctuary was to be destroyed as well. It was not to be taken as plunder. These items were considered an abomination and cursed by God. If brought into your home and you would be cursed. And in some situations we see, they were absolutely destroyed. Some people were. That word just means it needs to be something disgusting to you. It's something you abhor. And that was the abomination. That word curse just means to it just means cursed. It just means something cursed. When something's cursed, you need to not touch it and bring it into your home and just destroy it. Not touch it by taking possession of it, but destroy it. And so here's what some of the other students in the class had to say about this chapter. God told people not to have mercy. And the student said that she really meditated on that and came to understand that God was just simply using Israel to exterminate sin. And that was that's a great thing. That's a good way to think of it, because that is exactly what was happening. And for the Christian, nothing has changed. We are still here to be beacons for God, not killing people, of course, but simply stamping out sin. Another person said, God's word is simple. You shall do something or you shall not do something. God repeats this over and over again. It's as simple as it comes, because these people were very immature in a lot of ways, because they had just come out of slavery. And so God had trained them, and here he is giving them some very simple instructions. I'm going to say this one more time, I'm not going to say it again. Nothing's changed. Period. It's still very simple. When God says something, we are to understand that we are to do it, and maybe later we'll understand the depth of its wisdom. God redeemed them was another quote. They were part of the houses of slaves, and another person said because of that, God took possession of them, and this is what redemption means. It means you buy something back. And Jesus Christ did that for us. I said I wasn't going to reference that, but that's just the truth. It shows ownership. Jehovah was protecting them from wandering into idolatry because of his righteousness. He can't accept people who practice idolatry, so he was protecting them. God considered Israel a treasured possession. God was not willing to do, he was not willing to wait any longer on those Canaanite nations that were sinning these great idolatrous sins, where they were killing children and sacrificing children and doing all these terrible things. He was just done waiting on them, and that's why the people were ordered to go in. God is not a tyrant. Our lives and our souls belong to him. If he's going to take it, he's going to take it. That's the way the Christian looks at it. And there are lots of people who don't understand God, who try to make him out to be some sort of human being tyrant. And okay if he was a human being, but he's not. So that argument is just without foundation. So let's see. There was also some talk about contracts involving cutting, and in that day, sometimes there was one tradition where you would walk through animals that were cut open, and there was also for an indentured servant where they would have a contract and they would cut that contract as well. And you see God using this language with them. He's making an agreement with them. God has made an agreement with us through Jesus Christ. God is just, he's righteous, he cannot be a tyrant. Who are we to judge him? God is simple in his instructions. There was to be no accusations and no arguing. And another person said, as a manager, you make instructions clear to people so there is no ambiguity, and that's what God is doing here. God owned the souls of the children, and that goes to the arguments where people say, God ordered them to kill children. What kind of a terrible God is he? And what people don't understand is that these souls of these children belong to God. Our souls belong to God in one way or another. And, if God was bringing home the soul of a child, he was bringing it home because they are innocent before him. The nations were descended from Ham and cursed indirectly by Noah. Yes, this was part of prophecy. God reminds the people that they were to be humble and that they were not chosen out of their own strength or righteousness. This is all God's doing. God is faithful. He keeps his promises and his oaths, which is a foundation for Christianity today. When God says something, he doesn't need to promise. We call it a promise simply because he says it. God kept them from disease being put in, which could have put them outside of their communities. In that day, they were living in the camp. And that extended into when they went into and lived in cities and towns. If you were unclean, you were put outside. And, like if you had like leprosy or something, you were not allowed into the city. You were unclean. And so God giving them health, and they didn't get these diseases that they had in Egypt, was a great blessing for them. God was giving them the confidence that they were doing the right thing. And that wraps up all of the comments, and that is exactly right. He was building them up, as I said earlier, as an army of people, but also as, first and foremost, his people. And as I said earlier, they've already defeated a couple of kings that were kings of giant people who they were most afraid of, and he's building up their confidence in him, not in themselves. So there it is. I want to thank you for listening. I'll do this again next week. We'll be in chapter 8 of Deuteronomy next week. We do meet at the Church of Christ at 9 o'clock for this study. And we also have a Wednesday night study starting at 7 o'clock, and I think we're starting with 2 Peter or 1 Peter. I'll have to look into that. Let me look into it right now. 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude. And they just started that. I was not able to go on the last one. I was out like a light. But 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude. Thank you, and may God bless you.